Dear friends, welcome to the concluding discussion in the unit on still photography in the ongoing course of journalism and mass communication. In the previous lectures, we talked about the evolution of photography, the camera and its components, and some related subjects. In the present discussion, we shall take up the actual exercise of taking press photographs, the various kinds of photographs and situations which press photographers have to face in their day-to-day working. To begin with, let us understand that generally there are two kinds of photographs that are required in the newspaper industry. One is the routine photographs and the other is the feature or special photographs. So, first we take up the routine set of photographs. The ordinary poses a particularly troublesome challenge for the press photographer. The assignments that occur most often also seem to be the ones that present the least opportunity for creativity or for variations on well-worn themes. The result is news photograph cliches that any press photographer with a minimum of experience can easily get on any given day. In fact, these cliches have led to creation of certain categories of the routine photographs which are usually considered to be the simplest and the most ordinary categories, but required in a newspaper nevertheless. Category 1 is the group photograph. It includes visuals such as people who are newly elected office bearers of an organization, speakers at a conference, or committee members is standing against a banner posing for a photograph to be shot by the press photographer who is invited for this special purpose. Category 2 is the winner kind of photographs. In such a situation, usually there would be somebody handing over an award and there will be somebody who will be receiving it, and there will be someone or some more people who will merely look on the ceremony. The third category is the handshake category. In this category, you will have generally a celebrity or an important person or a politician arriving or departing from a venue or an airport or a conference or a parade and shaking hands with people who have gathered there to either see him off or to receive him. Category 4 is the benefit action category. The example of this category is an official or an important person planting a sapling or digging a pit or lending a hand in some people's working and so on in a factory or on a table and so on, or performing some customary act like cutting a ribbon. So it is a benefit action. The fifth category is the important man category. In this category, it shows an important politician or important person, bureaucrat, sitting or standing with a phone to his ear, looking very important, not looking into the camera, looking elsewhere, and making motions and gestures as if they are busy in something very important. It is rare indeed when the photographer returns from such and similar assignments with an exciting picture. The pictures in most cases will be the same, only the faces and the backgrounds may change. But some of the sameness can be overcome on occasion by advanced analysis of ingredients for improvement, for bringing about a different kind of a result. Another element to be thought about when settling down for a subject is the setting. Backgrounds or props, as you call it, can make a routine picture look different from another day's routine picture. The setting, of course, should have some readily apparent relationship to the individual or the group that is photographed. Objects in the foreground or background can help in storytelling and also in composition. Using different camera angles can also bring about an element of newness or a sense of urgency in a routine photograph. A switch to a low, high or side viewpoint may help, but such alternatives must be used with caution and not too frequently, otherwise every routine picture will start looking a special picture and the effort will dilute, and even the special picture will start looking like a routine picture. So there will be nothing else left to be done. Similarly, posing by the subjects in a routine activity may also infuse novelty. While some subjects may pose themselves, others may need some guidance by the photographer. But this guidance should be minimal. The longer it takes to pose the subjects, the more uneasy they become. Tight poses of groups kept to a maximum of 5 or 6 persons are most desirable, and individuals and groups should be given something to do with their hands or with their minds. Conversation will often ease the tension and establish a rapport between the photographer and the subject or subjects. The pose should usually make the faces easily recognizable, but this is always not necessary with celebrities especially. In case of spot news, the overwhelming demand of the news editors is to get a picture of what is happening, or to use a famous phrase, shoot what won't be there later. Technical excellence is required in the finished print but not essential. Good composition will help here as in any other picture, but waiting for it may produce only wasteful excuses for the city editor instead of pictures. His lack of control in other areas can be balanced somewhat by certain fairly standardized procedures. First of these is pre-focusing, a term which covers two related techniques. In one form of pre-focusing, the photographer focuses on a substitute object at or near a point which he expects his real subject to appear at. The second form of pre-focusing involves simply setting the camera at his best estimate of the expected distance where the subject is supposed to appear. Experienced photographers have long practiced this, usually setting the lens at 12 feet. Then, with the diaphragm stopped halfway down or more, the depth of field will take care of small errors in focus, and the photographer can correct for larger errors by quickly moving closer or farther away from the subject. Pre-focusing makes it possible to shoot fast when time out for a focus search would permit the opportunity to slip away. The photographer must be able to shoot from the hip, as the phrase goes, without raising the camera to eye level, and to shoot with the camera held overhead so the lens sees over a crowd of people, firemen, policemen, agitators and so on, and other cameramen also, or simply the curious people gathered there. The cinematic pattern provides a guide for covering many accidents, major disasters, fires and riots. This pattern begins with a long shot or a panoramic shot that establishes the location and the general situation. Then it moves progressively closer. In covering fires, for example, it is generally advisable to shoot one or more panoramic shots before moving in for medium range shots and close-ups of action. Foreground objects, the back of a fireman or the end of a fire brigade truck, will add the required depth and storytelling impact in medium range shots. Record shots of the damage come after the fire or rot has been controlled. In all cases, the photographer watches for the detail revealing close-up, the tense pose of a fireman, the emotion-marked faces of spectators, the close-up of a half-burnt article, or something which remains protected even after the devastating fire. Then we move on to another exciting area of news photography outside and also in routine, that is the sports photography. Experience in sports photography is an important part of photojournalism. On feature and some news assignments, the photographer can arrange the subjects and the lighting to enhance the picture's theme or message. But the value and interest of the sports page picture often depends on the photographer's split-second timing and the ability to recognize good pictures in time to catch them on film. Many persons would be excellent camera reporters if they could somehow photograph a memory. The photographer must act in the same instant that he sees the possibility, much the same as a racing car driver reacts instantaneously to avoid a crash. The important aspects of sports photography are as follows. Number 1, timing and planning. Timing of the action of the shutter release finger is extremely important in sports photography. Disgruntled editors are created by action photographs in which participants appear tired and lackadaisical because the shutter was tripped a little too soon or a little too late. In all sports, there are fairly regular moments at which action reaches a climax. These moments are expected but are always thrilling and give each sport its spectator appeal. In these moments, the major elements of the story of the contest are concentrated. The photographer must learn to anticipate these moments and situations. He trips his shutter as the action reaches the climax, actually a fraction of a second before the climax. This anticipation, coupled with the reaction lag between telling himself to shoot and the actual tripping of the shutter, will most consistently produce negatives and pictures that would contain climactic actions rather than the anticlimax, which would happen a second later or a second earlier. The shot which halts the motion or a fraction of an instant before the climax imparts a greater feeling of continuing action, builds up a momentary suspense which the reader quickly relieves by reading the outlines to learn what happened as a result of the picture climax, like a leg or a hand or a bat raised in midair or a ball caught in midair just before it hit the bat, and so on. Photographers who have made the greatest names in sports coverage have first become knowledgeable fans, but not emotionally involved either through actual participation or by studying the rules and keeping up with day-to-day developments on which team is doing what, and by knowing the proficiencies of individual players. Through an understanding of team tactics, the photographer keeps a step ahead, preparing for what is likely to come next by getting into position for the best possible camera angle. Many persons attribute great sports photographs to mere luck. This cannot possibly be the philosophy of sports photographers who consistently turn in good pictures week after week. They cannot be lucky all the time. Their luck cannot hold for such a long time. It means there is some effort behind it. The odds are against the man who depends on luck for his livelihood. Occasionally, luck will play a part, but the percentages favor the photographer who plans rather than depends on Lady Luck to smile on him. A 3-point formula used by many successful photographers includes these points. Number 1, first of all, know the sports, be interested in it. This will eliminate most of the need for luck because you will know what is happening and when to anticipate. Number 2, make a plan. This must contain answers to questions such as, where will I cover this spot from? What do we want today? We got a picture yesterday, so what it's going to be now? And the third is anticipate. The only basic thing about anticipation other than knowing the sport and knowing where the play is the anticipation of focus. So how to go about it? Almost all good photographers will get to the event early. If it is an event that takes place within a certain area, he will mark certain key spots or points where action will take place, mark them in his mind on his foot scale so he can quickly change to one or the other and be ready to shoot when it happens. In fact, experienced photographers actually calculate the number of steps they have to step backwards or leftways or sideways from a chosen spot where they can get the best angle for the action that is taking place in front of them. So this brings us to the subject of camera angles. The camera angle is a very important part of the plan for making dramatic sports pictures. Usually with football, basketball, cricket, hockey and horse racing, a low camera angle puts more impact into the final picture. Two different camera angles are almost equally desirable for good football coverage or field sports coverage. The most widely used is from the sidelines. The other is high atop the grandstand or from the press box itself. Several minutes spent in pre-focusing for expected action at different points on the field will result in a higher percentage of sharp images. Lenses with reflex focusing and view finding and also preset diaphragms are a great support and aid in shooting from the sidelines. Long lenses from the sidelines are desirable because they put the newspaper reader close to the action, so close that he may actually feel as though he was participating in the sport. This type of close-up action shows the reader the facial expressions and other details of the player that he was unable to see from the galleries of the grandstand. And this is a major factor in building the reader interest in the sports page. Intelligent, judicious cropping will help move the reader close to the action. Good cropping plus large prints often will sell the sports editor on the photograph's favorite shots. The sports editor wants superior pictures for their pages, but sometimes they need to be shown by the photographers as to what is superior. So, sports photography is an exciting and a challenging task which most photographers look forward to. Incidentally, sports photography has now emerged as an independent discipline within press photography, and most sports photographers would prefer to remain in the sports photography area rather than go about covering other events in the city. And so is the case with other non-sports photographers who would often say that they do not know how to capture the right moment because they do not know the sport. So that is how a somewhat separate channel of photographers has evolved who are exclusively devoted to sports, and therefore a cadre of sorts of sports photographers has actually emerged the world over. So we now move on to the category of feature pictures or special pictures. In fact, an increasingly larger percentage of pictures published in daily newspapers fall into the category of features. The routine plus the feature pictures probably total about 90% of the photographs published in a newspaper today. Many feature pictures appear and reappear with enough regularity to be considered routine. Examples are weather pictures when the weather is not of the spot news dimension, that is gathered clouds, heavy rains, sharp sunlight and so on. Holiday pictures such as travelers, tourists, especially children in colorful clothes rollicking around. And the first day or the last day of schools, with children going in after a long vacation and coming out as the vacations begin the next day. These are some routine pictures which appear almost regularly at the set points of time. These routine feature assignments increase the pressure placed on the photographer's originality and imagination. Most other feature assignments call upon the photographer to uncover the appeal in what is generally regarded as the dull routine of everyday life. In a feature photograph, the photographer is usually expected to express a feeling or an emotional attitude. To do this, the photographer must form a relationship between his own reactions and the sentiments within the person who will view the picture later. Photographers are heard saying this, that okay, they are taking this photograph because the reader will feel some kind of emotion which they can express. So we have the need for the photographer to understand the universal values such as the strong sentiments of anger, hate, love, joy, fear, lust, and the more difficult to define mood sentiments and sensations such as vitality, repose, satisfaction and distrust, the finite and the infinite. Some of the most successful feature photographs established broad limits for the viewer's imagination, only channel that imagination by mere suggestion without attempting to depict the occurrence of any singular event. The implications of such photographs, and from the implications the appeal, stem from nearly universal associations with certain general themes as mentioned just now. So in the feature pages categories, the feature photographs categories, one major category is the women's page or photographs exclusively featuring women. In fact, it has become common for mainstream newspapers to have a section devoted to special subjects, such as newspapers are now devoting more space to food, news, fashion, home decoration, child care, and of course women. The broadened news outlook has meant a change in picture content as well. In many papers, there is something more than women decked up in jewelry and festival finery. The informality and the realism characteristic of general news pictorial reporting has crept onto the people page also. Women's page photos are allowed to appear in straightforward shapes now, without the benefit of overlapping layout or other decorative styles. So, pictures in the society sections are bigger as well, giving the photographer greater and more frequent chances of playing with his imagination. So, despite the quite evident improvements in many newspapers, society photographs in general have lagged behind the progress made in other sections of most papers. It means the broadened coverage in world reporting in women's news provides the cue for better photography. We have much better and wider kind of writing as far as women's issues are concerned, but the photographs that are being used are still mostly routine and laid out in fairly conservative and traditional manners. So, food, fashion, home, decoration and children continue to be excellent subjects for photographic reporting, but somehow when it comes to routine, it's either the glamorous side which is highlighted, or it is a very routine and dull picture of women working, women walking on the street, women working as laborers or in fields, and the creativity is confined to certain stock shots. It has to be broken by the photographer, and it can be done only when the thoughts expressed in words are understood by the photographers. One reason for this could be that not many women photographers are to be found in the newspaper industry. So, the next category is food photographs. Readership studies have shown that readers' view of the newspaper jumps significantly when a word feature about food is accompanied by a photograph, especially when the picture is printed big enough to give full impact. Food pictures are required to have an appetite appeal. A cake, for example, should be shown on a table as the person who has made it is about to serve it. It is even better if a veg has already been cut and placed on a plate as an invitation to the reader. The same thing happens in case of food that is prepared, ready-made, fruits, vegetables and so on. Close-ups are considered to be routine and a must, but the color and light that falls on the food objects in front are considered to be something that has to be managed by the photographer. Fashion photography. In fashion photography, the basic objective is to show what the dress or coat or trousers or skirts or what other apparels look like on the person of the model who is wearing it. Many male photographers may find the word of fashion bewildering and glamorous and exciting, and they should accept guidance from the fashion editor or the magazine editor to understand fashion terms. Otherwise, all fashion photographs would tend to look flat. The story told by the fashion photo should include the basic silhouette or the shadow game of the dress. Backlighting is supposed to help emphasize the shadows, but shadows on the face of the model and the front of the dress must be filled in with reflectors or flash. The picture should indicate what sort of activity the dress is intended for, such as sports, streetwear, informal or formal evening wear. It has to be achieved through appropriate setting and accessories, but the background must not dominate and emphasis must remain on the dress. Some busy fabrics need plain or out of focus backgrounds, and the sky is one of the most appropriate backgrounds for this kind of photographs, especially for sportswear. In fact, most fashion shots gain in effectiveness if they are taken outdoors. The texture and pattern, if any, of the fabric should be evident, and the dressmaker's details of stitches and cuts and so on should be emphasized, usually by manipulation of the lighting. Usually one or two details about a dress make it different from hundreds of others. As most of you must be familiar with, fashion photography has grown into an independent section of photography itself because such photographs are not only used in newspapers but find a bigger market in magazines, other niche interest publications, and of course in online journals. Like in the case of sports photography, fashion photography is also considered to be a niche in itself, and many routine news photographers do not find themselves comfortable in shooting fashion situations and vice versa. So here also a separate cadre of sorts has evolved of photographers who specialize in fashion photography, close-ups, fashion shows, ramp shows, stage shows, and so on. Next category is interiors or objects which are kept in offices and homes and workplaces and so on. Like fashion photography, shooting home or office interiors puts the emphasis on special techniques. Best results are often achieved with the wide-angle lens and the view camera with its extra tilts and shifts. Most rooms have special points of interest that should be emphasized in pictures. The photographer must often add extra lighting effects, but with care so as to avoid destroying the usual appearance of the room. This can be achieved by such devices as substituting floodlights for the regular globes in light fixtures, holding a reflector-less flash bulb near a normal light source, or bouncing the flash or floodlights. Stories and pictures showing homes of the wealthy have high reader interest, as have the text and photo reports about modest homes which have been cleverly decorated. As we all see around us, it's not only magazines but newspapers and special interest publications that use interior photographs with great regularity, also on property related stories and reports, and of course in online journals as well. In many cases, interior photographs are used to highlight certain points in any other stories also, especially when the stories or the news reports are about business related subjects that have a reference to the objects shown in the interior related photograph. Next category in the special photographs or the feature photographs is the picture story. Newspaper readership studies consistently show relatively high reader traffic halts at most news illustrations or visuals related to news. The reader appears to get the strongest sense of identification or a sense of participation when the story progresses from a beginning through a series of related developments to a definite ending. This, of course, is a narrative, and a narrative can be presented in pictorial as well as textual form. The still photography of today's newspaper falls considerably short of being a serious challenge to movies or televisions in presentation of pictorial narratives. Nevertheless, the picture story with still photography is not only possible, but it is entertaining and effective as well. And many publications, including newspapers and magazines, have successfully done it and continue to do so. Newspaper photographers and editors who attempt to copy the techniques of famous pictorial magazines such as Life and National Geographic and so on are ill-advised to do so. Space dimensions and other publishing factors are obviously not the same in a magazine and a newspaper, but newspaper men can study and adapt the magazine techniques so as to make them fit in a newspaper page, where an element on a page is generally not taken or treated in isolation. There will be a lot of text around it, there will be advertisements, there will be small and big headlines, and a picture story is much difficult to tell on a newspaper page as compared to a magazine page. So, what is a picture page? A picture page in a newspaper is a common, but the picture story is still rare to be used. In most newspapers, actually, a picture page is a miscellaneous jumble of photographs that serves little good purpose except to provide an easy and quick way for the editorial desk to fill up a page when there is a sudden fall in advertising, or the day is dull and no news is forthcoming, or there is nothing worthwhile to fill up the page with. The variety page often serves one bad purpose. It robs other pages of good feature photographs or the arty kind of pictures. Readership studies show that reader interest is heavy on picture pages generally, but there is a good reason to suspect that such interest is often undirected and hit and miss kind of reader traffic, which may stay on the picture page if the pictures are good. Otherwise, readers may completely skip one entire page. The individual reader's eye probably misses more than it hits in the jumble of unrelated and actually competing pictures on a page. The eye flicks over the page, maybe stops briefly at one picture, perhaps reads the caption for that picture, and then it is gone, moving ahead to another element. The page, a general picture page that is generally thrown together hurriedly from a stock of pictures to be filled up at the last moment. The stock is actually accumulated over a period of several days waiting for this kind of an emergency, and the ones that happen to fit together in the rectangular form are used. Those that do not fit in such a form are not used. So the pattern of the page is entirely accidental and entirely unrelated to any of the subject matter presented in the pictures. Well, this is not an accurate description of the methods used by all newspapers, of course, but it is something that happens very frequently with most newspapers. In fact, the same purpose can be served by related pictures on a relatively timeless local subject with a bit of careful planning. The picture page then can present a unified appearance on a subject of local interest that will not only attract but most likely hold the reader's eye. So, three types of picture groups are identifiable for a special photo section. One is the picture sequence, the other is the picture essay, and the third is the picture story. The picture sequence is the simplest in nature and the most limited in scope. It merely shows development of a particular action from a limited point of view and for a limited period of time. A sequence, on the other hand, could be a series of pictures showing a person in action during a speech or interview, concentrating on facial expressions and manual gestures, or a series of pictures showing continuity of action during one particular play in a sporting event. Sequences, in fact, have become standard procedure in sports coverage by many newspapers. Although all pictures are generally taken with the camera in a fixed position, the sequence can tell much more than a single shot. Special cameras are sometimes used which take many instant exposures automatically. The picture essay, the next category, that is, deals with themes or ideas which are frequently rather intangible and therefore difficult to express in visual form. Here, the camera changes its point of view without altering the photographer's concept of the central theme. The subject may remain the same throughout the series, or various but related pictures subjects may be treated. The most difficult aspect of the picture essay is consistently maintaining the theme or idea from picture to picture. Like the text essay, the picture essay may treat serious sociological, economic, or cultural problems, or it may concern light or humorous topics as well. In fact, as you can understand or gather, it is not always easy to distinguish between the picture essay and the picture story. The two forms actually overlap, but in general, the picture story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The camera moves about, the scene changes, but the central subject usually remains the same in all pictures. And during the course of the story, something happens to the subject, and this happening is reported in the pictures. In essay, of course, the central subject may not be there at all, but the overall theme and the background would remain the same, and the camera will move from one place to the other, not with any one subject, but with the theme itself traveling from one picture to the other. Newspaper photographers and editors will find endless subjects for picture sequences, essays, and picture stories in their own backyards, in the everyday life of their communities, cities, villages, and so on. Since the universal implies the familiar, and in feature photography, good technique is taken for granted, it is not necessary that a picture of the familiar will have universal appeal. The merely familiar will not make a successful photograph. What makes the photograph is the photographer's ability to see more and see more clearly than the average observer. The feature photographer's opportunities lie in the confusing mass of impressions that beat upon us as we move through normal routine activities of the day. It is indeed the photographer's job to clarify, to intensify, and interpret by eliminating the non-essential elements so that the salient points have a chance to make their impression. Selection and organization of elements for emphasis is essential in a feature photograph. It is easy for the preoccupied mind to pass by feature picture possibilities in the routine of the city in a day's work. The photographer who has trained his mind to watch for good pictures wherever he looks will be the one who turns up with the unexpected, and he will get the doubly welcome feature shot. It can be something on the side of the road, outside a building, inside a market, inside a multiplex, outside a cinema hall, in a field, in a park, and so on. This trained mind comes for most photographers only from conscious effort. Actual concentration on looking for pictures wherever they go, until it eventually becomes an almost unconscious second nature activity. The pictures discovered in this way frequently have an immediate use in the newspaper. At other times, they may be held for use when a future situation creates a demand for such pictures. The photographer looking for feature pictures remembers that people are about the most interesting subjects in the world, especially their faces. But he does not look away from scenic shots, although he watches for views that are relatively simple in form, a simple cloud, a simple flower against a complicated background, and so on, with the forms separated by contrast between the light and the dark and not merely by the differences in color. The familiar, therefore, can be pictorially effective from a vantage point that is unfamiliar. Often, this is the explanation for the effectiveness of aerial shots, long shots, close-ups, and night views. In all these 3 or 4 conditions, even the familiar can look strange, exciting, and unknown. The camera transports the newspaper reader to a viewpoint that is new and revealing, that tells him something about his environment that he has been unconscious of, unaware of. Normally, the news photographer operates as quietly as possible, avoiding to call attention to himself wherever he can, whether it is a press conference, whether it is a concert going on in a hall, whether it is people moving about on the street and so on. The news photographer would like to remain as inconspicuous as possible so that his angle and his spot of taking the photograph is not disturbed. But sometimes a different approach is needed, and the man with the camera must know where a little brashness or a brash attitude will help in getting the picture which it is as. So we move on to the next element in photography, that is the captions. Most photographers dream of making the picture that needs no help from the words or the text. But such pictures come along very rarely. Words are sometimes needed to direct attention gently, softly to the meaning of the picture, and almost always needed to fill informational gaps, since most situations contain non-visual elements. These are the jobs of captions, or cut lines as they are often called. Strictly speaking, a caption is a heading and cut line is the explanatory matter beneath the picture. Good cut lines are concise, direct sentences that avoid merely repeating the story that the photograph tells. Sometimes the cut lines call attention to or explain obscure or not readily understood elements within the picture. So, in newspaper pictures, a principal task of the picture lines is to furnish the who, the where, and the when. It is the photographer's responsibility to see that the information he supplies to the caption writer is accurate, with the right spellings, right nomenclature, right facts and figures, and so on. In fact, he is expected to supply the facts and not some lofty phrase like a great sunrise or a grand performance and so on. So, the picture has to be a true reflection of what it wants to convey, rather than the photographer wants to push it, because the picture cannot push by itself. The photographer should not hesitate to furnish all the facts that he knows. Incomplete information from the photographer may force the caption writer to guess about the significance of what he sees in the picture, and the result may be disastrous in some cases. So, according to one editor and observation of many others, success in photojournalism comes from, number one, having intuitive identification with the subjects of a story. Number two, a willingness to risk danger and physical discomfort, whether it is news photography or feature photography. Number three, the ability to use equipment, reporting skills, and every imaginable production device to convey exact meanings. Number four, ability to plan for the expected and also the unexpected. Number five, luck, which means being like a good part of a good team that forces its own victory without the players really working for it. Number six, knowing when to be bold and brash and when to tread softly in the course of his work. Number 7, the ability to share with the reader a sense of participation, whether in mountain climbing or street fighting or in the more familiar adventures of everyday life, like people lining up to fill water from a roadside tap, or people standing in a queue to get tickets or rations, or children playing on a street when there is a strike and there is no traffic on the road. An unsatiable curiosity and features like physical stamina, mental stamina, and agility, and a persistent search for something better is what will help a photographer get good feature and news photographs. It must be remembered at this point that the basic qualities required for getting a good news photograph and a good feature photograph are almost the same. It is only a question of the attitude and the purpose with which a photograph is taken that will make even a news photograph a very good feature photograph, and vice versa. So this brings us to another interesting related topic of art versus technique. It is one significant area that must be understood in this part of the study, that is the borderline between technique and art in press photography. When the photographer's sole intention is to make a picture for documentary purposes, then the only concern is with technique. However, a great news photograph may not be very good from the artistic point of view. This comparison and assessment is constantly made in the newsroom, as every contribution of a press photographer is taken to be a test of his capability. The photographer determines what he will photograph and how, but when making all preparations, he must certainly and constantly bear in mind the creation of suitable technical conditions for the successful course of all physical and technological processes. The catching itself of the latent picture on the sensitive layer of the photographic material of the film roll or the CCD of a digital camera is a technical matter already, just as the developing and fixing of the film or the adjustment of the JPG document in the case of digital camera. From the artistic aspect, the taking of pictures basically ends with the pressing of the button. The most important tasks which can substantially influence the artistic value of a good press photograph are carried out before the shutter is pressed. What is not caught on the picture can never be added to the print, but one must not underrate the technical aspects of photography. The photographer may have the most sensitive perception and the best possible vision, but if he is unable to express himself pictorially in the correct manner, then he will never pass on the required information about his observation to anyone else, least of all the editor to whom he submits his photographs, or the editor or the reader of the paper. It is of course a certainty that without technical procedure, no photographs can ever be made. On the other hand, if all creative operations are discarded and only technical tasks are retained, then the resulting photograph would have only documentary value and not excite anyone enough for him to hold it in his mind for at least a short time. By expanding his technical knowledge, the photographer undoubtedly expands his range of coverage. Anyone not wanting to stagnate and seeking to expand the range of themes as well as to find unusual way of giving them shape must study technique for virtually his whole life. Knowledge gained in this manner is something quite different from the study of the technique for its own sake, which the amateurs often do in their admiration of modern equipment, like when somebody gets a digital camera, children or young people, they would like to know every function that is associated with it, but not many of them can take good photographs out of it. So technique is one thing which is important for handling the equipment and assessing the environment which is available for taking a photograph, the time of the day, the light at that moment, the availability or the distance of the subject and so on. But art is something which happens in the mind of the photographer, regardless of the type of camera he is using, regardless of the subject in front of him, and of course regardless of the time of the day or the amount of light. It is certainly not accidental that most photographers whose individual styles had made a name for them had a sense of harmonious combination of deep knowledge of technique and sensitive perception. The innovative use of existing equipment frequently enabled them to expand the limits for taking pictures substantially more than did the average photographers. A good photograph must always give the impression of something new, and this can be achieved both by a surprising combination and by catching a subject which could not be photographed up to then for technical reasons. Since the backbone of press photographs are live shots, there has to be a greater universality about them so that the life in them can be understood by every viewer regardless of place or language. It is often said that photographs have no language and they can be understood by anyone in any part of the world, and they should not need captions to tell a story. Most readers almost subconsciously look for such photos on a page, which sets them thinking about how the scene they are witnessing would be continuing, or what happened before this photograph was taken, and so on. So, live shots can be made while observing extraordinary events such as natural catastrophe, military conflicts, demonstrations, etc., or the ordinary life of completely unknown people. Somebody going about his work in a local train, in a bus, on the road, and so on. Among the live shots of exceptional and ordinary events, there is no hard and fast borderline. The classic variant on the threshold between the two is sports photography, which is both routine and special at the same time. Thus, as is evident from the reasons cited here, the use of art and technique is not one against the other, but rather one with the other simultaneously, since life is a moment that has to be captured as artistically possible, for which the right technique must be deployed. So, to conclude the topic, we must take a brief look at the code of ethics for press photographers, which includes all aspects of art, technique, equipment, and so on. This code is slightly different from the ethics of photography, which we discussed some time ago, because in India there is no separate code of ethics for press photographers nor any professional standards. Therefore, anyone who owns or hires a camera can try his luck in press photography. It is precisely because of this that press photographers often get into trouble with officials, general public, and colleagues alike over issues concerning the way they work. At this point, it is worthwhile to know that there is a code of ethics laid down by the National Press Photographers Association in the US. This association, incidentally, is a professional society that promotes the highest standards in visual journalism and acknowledges the concern for every person's need, both to be fully informed about public events and to be recognized as part of the world. It is to be noted that even though the code is meant for press photographers in the US, its language and content are almost universally applicable. Some of the points in this code say that visual journalists and those who manage visual news productions should be held accountable for upholding the standards of being accurate, comprehensive, and resist manipulation by staging photo opportunities. They should be complete and provide context when photographing or recording subjects, and they should avoid stereotyping the subjects which they are shooting. They should treat all subjects with respect and dignity and give special consideration to vulnerable subjects as children or women in pain or people who are injured and so on, and show compassion to victims of crime or tragedy. They should not intrude on private moments of grief and do so only when the public has an overriding and justifiable need to see that grief, that private moment of grief. And editing should maintain the integrity of the photographic image's content and context, and photographs should not be manipulated or anything should not be added after the photograph has been taken to mislead the viewers or misrepresent the subjects. The photographers must strive to ensure that the public's business is conducted in public, and it should be mentioned that the photojournalists have a right to report, not to intrude. So, as is clear from this, a comprehensive code is desirable for photographers as well. As we have studied earlier, a code of ethics has to be in place which is voluntary and devised by the industry itself. So, with this observation, we come to the conclusion of this unit on still photography, and undoubtedly it is an exciting and adventurous subject that gives freedom to press photographers to be on the lookout for great subjects and come up with something memorable every time. The work demands high professional standards and a basic knowledge of journalism and the camera technique as well. The study of photography would seem very easy if one has a good camera or if one has been taking photographs for some time, first with film cameras and then with digital cameras. There are points which may appear theoretical at first, but they have to be understood fully if one wishes to improve their work. So, a new topic of study shall be taken up in the next discussion, and till then, all the best and thank you.